Available everywhere
Hello everyone and welcome back to the GSMC Fantasy Sports Podcast, brought to you as always by the GSMC Sports Network. Hope you guys enjoyed that last segment. We were also going to be looking not just at Sunday Night Football from a betting perspective, but from a fantasy perspective, and look at some of the stardom sit-em options for this game for you guys. And I think this one is pretty clear-cut. You guys might be a little mad at me for some of the things I'm going to say here compared to what I was saying positively about the Ravens in that previous segment, but this was my ultimate opinion from what I thought of the matchup, just because of, how both of these teams' trajectories have been throughout the season. So without further ado, let's talk about my options. The obvious start here, at least from a QB perspective, is Josh Allen. I would say Josh Allen, out of all the players playing in that game, is the one who I would say you should pencil in immediately as your starting quarterback, should you have him. 30.92 fantasy points last week against Jacksonville. And yes, a lot of people are going to say, well, the Jacksonville defense is worse, much worse than the Baltimore defense. Well, the Baltimore defense really hasn't been good at generating pressure. It really hasn't been good in terms of generating takeaways. So I say to that, well, while they are kind of better than the Jacksonville defense, they're not necessarily going to really hurt or hinder Josh Allen in this offense. I mean, if anything, I think that Josh Allen's going to be willing to exploit the Ravens secondary a lot more. I know that they have a lot of injuries in that part of their defense, and Josh Allen will be chomping at the bit to kind of exploit that. But at the end of the day, I'm not as scared of the Ravens defense as I was last year, and I'm not scared of them in this matchup especially. So Josh Allen, look for him to have a big day yet again against the Baltimore Ravens. And then in terms of sitting, I talked about this guy a little bit, Zay Flowers. He really has not necessarily shown me much as a fantasy receiver or as a real-life receiver for this Ravens offense. And you can say it's through no fault of his own. You can say it's offensive line issues. You can say it's the fact that out of structure, the Ravens really don't necessarily have much of a game plan. But whatever it is that you are thinking of in terms of the reason why Zay Flowers isn't performing to the standards we hold him to, I just think that he's not someone who I would even consider as a matchup guy. He's losing his value week in, week out in this offense. I just feel like Lamar starting to trust players like Justice Hill and Isaiah Likely a little bit more. I feel like that's the way this offense is orienting, and that's what it's becoming a little bit more of. And if the offensive line woes continue, then I don't see a path to where that connection gets revitalized, if you want me to be honest with you. I think that right now, Zay Flowers is someone who is quickly falling down tiers to where he's almost undesirable by anyone. So he's going to be my first sit here for this game. So another start, almost all Bills here, James Cook. And this is not my bias of him being one of my better players on my personal fantasy team, but he has just been a revelation for this Bills offense because of the many ways they can utilize him. They love him as a workhorse back. They love him as a guy who can occasionally break off and get that explosive play for you. They love him in the screen game. They love him in so many different ways, and it's paying dividends for them. And as long as Josh Allen can trust him in that backfield, James Cook will continue to get a lot of touches, continue to put up a lot of yards. Maybe not as many yards as some other guys in that offense just because they have so many mouths to feed. But James Cook is just someone who at the end of the day is a solid fantasy running back. He's someone who you might not have expected as your RB1 or liking as your RB1 to start the year. But in my personal opinion, he has been paying dividends for my offense, my fantasy offense, in terms of being that RB1 that I so desperately wanted. And he's really making up for the deficiencies in my fantasy running back room as DeAndre Swift is continuing to fail me, as Andre is asking advice for his own fantasy football lineup. Josh Allen, Jordan Mason, Kenneth Walker, Jamar Chase, Olave, Godwin, Kelsey, flex David Montgomery, or should I drop Godwin for Wilson? I really like this lineup in fantasy this week. I really do. Monitor the K9 situation if you know he's in your flex. Well, actually, he's not in your flex, but that's for another day. But I really like this lineup. I think that, your wide receiver's pretty strong. I wouldn't necessarily imagine Jamar Chase will struggle against a Panthers defense that just beat up on the Raiders. I mean, it's the Raiders. So I would expect Jamar Chase to have a pretty good game. Olave could be a tense situation, but he could be a big difference maker in that game, which would be a very gritty physical game. As Andre also says, he has Charbonnet in case K9 doesn't play. Well, the thing about Charbonnet is he's a very high-risk, high-reward player. He might not get as much yardage as you would like, but he is someone who can get the occasional touchdown, so he's someone who's going to be a very interesting player to monitor, especially in this week's game against Detroit. But the rest of this lineup, Josh Allen, like I said, I would pencil him in if he were my starting quarterback immediately. Mason, as always, really proving to be an apt replacement for Christian McCaffrey in that San Fran offense. Did have kind of a down day against LA, but that was just Jawan Jennings' game to shine. But overall, I really like this option. In terms of dropping Godwin for Wilson, yeah, I would say, as Andre said, Charbonnet in the goal line, I trust him to get in the end zone 9 out of 10 times. Yeah, but in certain situations in the open field, I wouldn't necessarily say so as a Seattle fan. But at the end of the day, I really like this lineup. In terms of the Godwin for Wilson question, I will say this. The Jets-Broncos matchup overall seems like a better matchup. But like you said, going up against Surtain, who's already faced some of the better wide receivers in this league, in DK, in Mike Evans, and doing what he has done really gives me pause. Whereas Godwin going up against, who are they playing this week? The Buccaneers. I'm blanking on the matchup for them, but I think that, Godwin's going to have a better day just based off the matchups alone. So I would say Godwin has a safe place in that lineup for now. But week in, week out, Godwin and Wilson are two guys who, like I said, are very matchups oriented. But in terms of this game, I want to get back to a guy who I think that you might want to sit, as Andre said, I sent the MHJ owner an offer of Olave and Ridley. See, I like MHJ a lot, and I think that he's going to continue to grow in this Arizona offense. I don't think he's worth two players who can get you the same in their respective roles than just one MHJ. Because MHJ, like I said, is someone who I really value in that Arizona offense, but he's going to have a lot of boom or bust games because they have to find their footing. As Andre also mentions, his team was insane when he made a terrible trade before Week 11. On Week 1, I traded Cook and Rice for Olave and Pacheco. That's not as terrible a trade as you think, but seeing as to how I have seen Cook and Rice become very valuable fantasy assets in my own team, I could see why you're miffed by that. But like I said, it's not as terrible. Yes, the Pacheco injury, but Olave, I kind of feel like, is one of those receivers who week in, week out, you can semi-rely upon to put up good fantasy numbers for you. That's just me. I think that the team that you have shown me for your lineup for this week, as Tap to Learn gives me the matchup Bucks home to Eagles. So, again, both of those games are games that you feel like the wide receivers might not have as favorable matchups, but I still think Godwin will have a favorable matchup, as Baker loves playing the Eagles, and I think that he's going to want to pass the football early and often in this game. But that's just my opinion. It's ultimately, as Andre said, I didn't expect Cook to get this many goal line carries this year. I didn't even really expect him to get as many open field carries this year, or be relied upon in so many different situations in the open field for the Bills. I expected him to be kind of more of a workman-like guy who on early downs would just set the tone for the offense, and Josh Allen would just spread the ball around in late down situations. But no, he's been used in a lot of different situations, especially at, like you said, the goal line. So, yeah, he's really paid dividends for me in my personal fantasy team. It kind of sucks that you decide to trade him away pretty early, but it is what it is in fantasy football sometimes, and you just got to roll with the punches. But that team that you just showed me with all these fantastic players should have a pretty good week. You just have to balance it out, watch true for injuries. As Andre says, his usage is just completely different this year. I should have assumed it knowing they lost Diggs. Well, you could have also assumed that potentially Brady could have said, well, we want to keep kind of the same structure we had with Diggs, just, utilizing more pieces. And that's another thing that they've done so well. As Andre said, he was surprised Allen is still doing this good without Diggs. Some people were worried. I'm actually not surprised. I'm one of those people who kind of expected Allen to be much more comfortable in this role. As, losing Diggs, losing the tension that comes with having a guy who demands the football so much in your team really would elevate his status. And also, the addition of Joe Brady. I really like what he's done. I can't preach his name enough. I can't sing his praise enough for what he's done with the Bills' offense thus far. He's going to be tested later in the season. They're going to have a lot of touch matchups, especially in the East, in that division. But I've liked what he's done so far. So I'm not necessarily surprised. It's just that I feel like it's more of a relaxed approach where Allen doesn't feel like he has to account for Diggs as much too. And then for James Cook, in terms of his usage, it's just that I feel like it's not necessarily a losing Diggs thing. It's more of becoming more versatile, if that makes sense. It makes sense to utilize your running back more in a short passing game if you know your quarterback has had troubles with turnover issues, but you can still utilize that deep ball. I feel like by Josh Allen using James Cook kind of as a screen guy or in the goal line more, as Andre kind of reiterates the same way by saying Allen loves this team because they don't care who gets the ball. I agree. I feel like as long as they stay on schedule, as long as the tempo of this offense feels right, I'm not concerned about it. But thank you for your comments. We actually do have to take a quick break. I did not get through all of my stardom cinema, unfortunately. But right after the break, we actually take a little bit of a respite from the NFL and look ahead to the exciting college football games that I believe will have huge fantasy implications if there are any fantasy college football fans out there as well. So we'll be right back after that short break in order to talk about that.